Now, Paizo says that Pathfinder 2E and Starfinder 2E are compatible. And let's analyze that and see if that claim is actually true. Hello, folks. Phil Gallagher, aka Thraben, and you here for another Pathfinder 2nd Edition video and Starfinder 2nd Edition video, as we're going to be covering both today. And we're going to try to figure out whether or not Pathfinder 2E and Starfinder 2E are really compatible, and if they're not, where are the breakpoints going to be? Is it going to be in flavor? Is it going to be mechanics? And we're going to deep dive all of that. Before I get going here, let me just say a quick thank you to everyone who is supporting me as a YouTube member. It means a lot, especially right now. Without getting into it too much, I got some water damage in the house, and I am replacing most of the insulation in my house right now. It's an expensive proposition. I'll be fine, but the financial support means a lot, so thank you. If you're not in the position to financially support my channel, don't sweat that. Subscribing, leaving likes and comments on the videos, that means a lot to a growing channel like this one. I want to say that this video is funded particularly by one of my Discord members, Anubis, who wanted to see this topic in action, so thank you for that. So today, I'm going to talk about some of my quick anecdotes about play experience from my personal Pathfinder 2E, Starfinder 2E table. We're doing a mixed campaign right now that we started a few weeks ago. We've done a handful of combats and sessions, so I've gotten some real play experience in this sort of situation. Then we're going to look at compatibility between the two systems in terms of both theme and flavor in both directions. Can you drop a Pathfinder character into a Starfinder game? Will the flavor work? And vice versa. And then we'll take a look at it in terms of mechanics and numbers and abilities and all of that stuff. Again, both the ability to drop a Pathfinder character into a Starfinder game and a Starfinder character into a Pathfinder game. And then at the end of the video, we'll talk about opening up the floodgates and doing a full-on mixed table, anything goes Pathfinder 2E, Starfinder 2E table, sort of like what I'm doing. So without further ado, let's get into it. So I want to talk with some personal anecdotes about my first couple of sessions playing a mixed Pathfinder 2E, Starfinder 2E party. I am personally playing a Witch Warper in this campaign with the Fan Dancer archetype. Long story short, I want to win initiative every single time, and by Jove, I am doing it. And one of my fellow PCs is playing an Investigator, but is using Starfinder 2E weapons. And so we're starting to see what this cross compatibility looks like. And I theory crafted a couple of different characters for this campaign before settling on my Witch Warper. Love that class so much, by the way. And here are some of my initial thoughts about the mixed play. Number one is it is fun. The Investigator loves that she does not have to reload a gun. She wanted to use a gun for kind of flavor reasons, having to deal with like the detective nature of her character. She just thought that was great and was fully planning on just using a D4 air repeater before I was like, but what if you had a D8 weapon instead? A D8 weapon with boost even. And I sold the GM on this idea of allowing Starfinder weapons into the game. It was not a tough sell. I will say that once you put both systems on the table at the same time, it opens up your character customization options exponentially. There's a lot of classes in Pathfinder 2E. We're getting to about the 30 classes point, I think, if you're counting some of the playtest stuff. And then you're adding the Starfinder classes to it, pushing our total a little bit closer to 40. And when you open up stuff between the two systems, it's not just the classes you're adding, it's the items and the spells and the augmentations and the new general feats and the new ancestries. There's a ton of stuff on the table. And that is really cool for the tinkerers out there. And also, holy moly, is that overwhelming, mentally speaking, about the sheer number of options that are now possible for characters in these mixed games. And kind of on that note, I really recommend easing into it in terms of jumping into a mixed play system. I don't think you need to, have full mastery of both games to start playing with both of them. You can look things up. And while over time, some play patterns of like, hey, this mixture of this class and this archetype from Starfinder with this weapon, some of that stuff will become apparent. For now, I would just say, like, if you want to build something for some flavor reasons, like, go do it, figure out what you need to figure out in order to make that happen, but please don't get bogged down with every option. The PC core for Starfinder 2E is 300 or 400 pages long. It is a chonky book, and I have had that for longer than most people because I got early access to it from Paizo. Thanks for that, by the way. And I'm still learning stuff all the time and still looking up stuff all the time. And kind of on that note, a lot of the online character builders are not ready to do this yet. So I have a working fix going so that I have Path Builder kind of doing what I need it to do, but there's going to be some things that aren't quite ready for this full mixture yet. So just kind of be aware that if you're going in for this, you might be on a paper character sheet for a little while until the apps catch up to the release of this. Just something to be aware of. So let's start evaluating dropping a Pathfinder character into a Starfinder game. And we're going to start by doing this in terms of themes and flavor rather than mechanics. And up here, I have a list of all of our various classes in Pathfinder 2e, at least the fully released ones. There's other things in the playtest stages like the Necromancer still. And I put this up here mostly to get a visual of these. More on that in a second. And I'm going to make some gross generalizations here. In the Starfinder world, magic exists, right? And that means that your base casters being dropped into a Starfinder 2e game is going to work. The spell lists are the same, in that we still have the 4 spell traditions. Does Starfinder 2e have every single Pathfinder 2e spell kind of innately in the book at this time? No, absolutely not. But if you've got an arcane spell list, even if it's slightly different from the Starfinder spell list, the same general strengths, weaknesses, abilities, all that stuff is going to be there. And Starfinder 2e makes concessions for what they call archaic weapons existing. That is, the weapons that are going to use runes. And they have some weapons of their own that kind of have this archaic trait, which is often paired with the analog trait, meaning that it's not like a technology-driven weapon like the things with the tech trait are. And so, as a gross oversimplification, your casters are going to work in the system, and your marshals are going to work in this system. And since we have guns, our gunslinger should work. And since we have high technology, our inventor should work. Now I put asterisks by those. Why did I do that? When we get into the mechanics of the gunslinger specifically in the video, you are going to feel that the gunslinger feels a little off once we are in the Starfinder 2e universe. But in terms of flavor, the gunslinger is covered. And I think in terms of flavor, the inventor is mostly covered, but I've put an asterisk by this because I think it is covered in a different way. In the Pathfinder 2e universe, I feel like when you are playing an inventor, you are the special person who tinkers and makes things that are better than what everyone else is capable of doing. And I feel like if you play an inventor in the Starfinder universe where all this high technology exists, you are a person that is capable of doing this tinkering. You are one scientist, one engineer of many, rather than being special. So the inventor in Pathfinder 2e has the uncommon tag, as it might not fit every single fantasy-themed game that you want to be doing in the Pathfinder world. Whereas the inventor in the Starfinder world feels totally commonplace. So I think you can play an inventor in terms of flavor without missing a beat in a Starfinder world, you might feel less special. Now, speaking of special, let's talk about the exemplar. The exemplar, in theory, should fit into this world. You're a martial class, you've got some fancy items, nothing to write home about in that regard. And then if you start thinking about the flavor, I think the exemplar starts to feel a little bit weird. The God's Reign event that creates the exemplar class is very much tied to a specific place and time in the Pathfinder 2E world. And it feels weird to jet forward a couple thousand years, I forget how much exactly it is, and just go, oh yeah, we still got exemplars. That feels off to me. Also, the exemplar is this like pseudo divine demigod figure, and you've still got like deities and such in your cosmic level worlds, but it feels to me like the exemplar is a like local level hero, a folklore legend, maybe even a planet level legend. But in the space of a cosmic level adventure, flavorfully speaking, the exemplar feels a little bit weird to me. So I think what we're seeing here is that the themes and flavor mostly work, but there might be some little hiccups here and there where you go, this doesn't feel quite like I expected it to feel. I don't think there's any deal breakers here, though. And in fact, I think dropping some Pathfinder 2E characters into the Starfinder world can actually make the flavor better. So we have a psychic class in Pathfinder 2E, and we have a psychic ancestry in Starfinder 2E, the Lashunta. And being able to build a Lashunta psychic and be a psychic sounds really cool to me. And for those of you that like building on flavor rather than optimizing for things like power, I think the mixed environment is going to create some really flavorful and unique characters. And I think unique is something that Starfinder 2E is shooting for. They've said that they want this cantina feel, this cosmic space station, this cosmic rest stop feel, where you have people coming in and out from all over the universe, from all sorts of scales of life, from all sorts of levels of technology. And I think in this Starfinder world, it is very hard to point to something and go, that can't exist in this world. When we are at the cosmic level, I think you are going to end up with adventurers of all sorts of different natures in terms of ancestries, abilities, technology levels. And I think in your session 0 of a campaign, you can explain away just about anything as making sense in a Starfinder 2E world. And so for this first section, I'm giving Paizo the 2 thumbs up here. I think this works. I think most Pathfinder 2E characters can be dropped into Starfinder games with minimal flavor interruptions, without any sort of theme feeling totally off. So, round 1 win for Paizo. Well then, what about the other way around? What about putting Starfinder characters into a Pathfinder world? Now, as far as the formally released finished classes that are not in playtesting stages, we've only got 6 right now. We have 2 caster classes, the Witch Warper and the Mystic. We have 3 martial classes, and these are very different classes, but good enough for now. We've got the Envoy, the Operative, and the Soldier. And then we have this sort of strange kineticist-esque class in the forms of the Solarian. So we don't have that many classes to think about in terms of overall umbrellas. And I think the burden of dropping Starfinder characters into Pathfinder games is all about the technology level. So many of these characters are going to be using laser guns. They're going to have fancy implants in their bodies that changes their biology. You are going to have force fields. You are going to have jetpacks. You are going to have spacecraft potentially in your backstory or listed in your abilities somewhere, as you have proficiency in piloting and things of that nature. And I think it's here that we might run into some flavor issues. And this is more pointed at the GMs than anyone else. If you have someone who wants to play a Starfinder character in a Pathfinder game, I think you need to be thinking, how are you doing this? Is this one character out of place and out of time? Or am I just opening up my world to saying, like, yes, this is a fantasy world, but we also have lasers? Like, how are you going to approach that as the GM? And I think some of the options are easier to swallow than others here. Now, Pathfinder 2E does already canonically have a time traveler background. It is already possible, albeit with the rare tag, to have someone who is physically out of place, out of time. But you're going to start getting into some questions later. How does this person upgrade their weapons if you don't have all of the various high technology? Like, what are you doing as you level up? Are you having them fully use Pathfinder 2E weapons? Are you using Starfinder 2E weapons? There might be some baggage going along with this. And if you are not going to bring pieces of the Starfinder setting with you, I think some specific subclasses and abilities fully aren't going to mesh with the setting here. So, for example, here's one of the subclasses up on the screen, the Infiltrator, which I think is one of the Envoy subclasses. You're trained in computers. Well, that's fully a skill that does not exist in Pathfinder 2E. You get the Sabotage action, which is about damaging and manipulating tech stuff. Well, the tech trait does not exist in Pathfinder 2E at all. And so if you don't bring the setting with you, some of the characters are going to feel very off. And you want a PC to be able to do the things that they're good at. And if the character is good at computers or they're good at piloting, you might really struggle to let that character shine in this setting. And my verdict here is that I am still going to give this a thumbs up despite all of this, but I feel like everything in this direction has the rare tag in the way that something going from Pathfinder to Starfinder wouldn't. Now, I think your casters are super easy to do. This is something that I am doing in my own campaign. I dropped a Witch Warper into that campaign, but I'm not using a gun. I'm not using a force field or a jetpack or anything like that. My campaign, in terms of flavor, is set in the 1940s. And I can just drop in this Witch Warper and not have to worry about that at all. I don't think you have to bring the technology with you. But depending on your setting, if someone wants to play a character who is good at computers, who is good at high tech, bringing that technology into your world might literally destroy your entire world. I did a previous homebrew campaign setting where we did our campaign in modern day America, and while we were learning Pathfinder 2E, we had to deal with, okay, I'm going to recall knowledge, but I also have the entire internet at my disposal. And that was bad enough. Now, I want you to imagine doing that, but it's not just the entire internet. Like, you have entire comm systems. You can communicate with spaceships in theory. You have your own spaceships potentially. And the technology might break your world. And I will tell you from experience that having the internet as something that existed in the Pathfinder world was very jarring in terms of flavor. So from the GM side, like, be ready for that and really think about how much of this technology stuff you're in for. And it may be that you take some of this and you go, yeah, we can hand wave the guns, that's fine, but I'm not on board with some of this other stuff. So very much a rare tag situation. So far we're giving Paizo passing marks here for making the systems compatible. Now, are there some asterisks here? Are there potentially some problem spots? Absolutely. But now let's start looking at the mechanics. And once again, we're going to start by thinking about what happens if we drop the Pathfinder characters into the Starfinder world. And I think the first thing that you're going to have to do as a GM is make your call on what you are doing regarding gear, spells, feats, ancestries, and all of that stuff. Are you going to rule this if you're playing a Pathfinder character, all your gear and stuff is Pathfinder gear? Are you doing it, you're a Pathfinder class, but all of your gear is Starfinder stuff? Or are you just fully opening the door and saying, yeah, you can mix and match that stuff however you want? And this is a surprisingly big decision that could probably be an entire video all on its own. But this is something I think you would need to really, really give it some thought about. To give a practical example here, my current campaign is starting at level 5. And our investigator is getting a gun with boost. I forget the exact name of it. It is a D8 ranged weapon with boost. Doesn't effectively need to be reloaded in a combat. But to make sure we don't break the balance of the game, we're starting out as boost only giving 1 additional die, when in theory it should be giving 2 at this level, as we're kind of playing it safe at first and we're making sure we don't break anything while we are opening the door. We're kind of being a little conservative at first, and if we realize everything is okay, like, we'll go from there. And on the nature of guns in particular, I think this is a spot where there is a real mechanical difference. Generally speaking, in Pathfinder 2E, when you fire a gun, you need to take an action to reload it. And there are some ways around that with some gunslinger action compression, and there are some repeating weapons that can be fired more than one time before you have to reload that gun. And I think the gunslinger is going to feel a little strange in the Starfinder world, because the gunslinger is supposed to be the gun class, right? It is supposed to be the class that is good at guns. But when we look at Starfinder guns, the gunslinger is good with Pathfinder guns, the ones that require reloading, because all of its various feats and features are thinking about guns that do need to be reloaded. Its damage increase, I think called Slinger's Precision, is for guns that have reload, or I think crossbows as well. Well, most of your Starfinder guns don't effectively need to be reloaded. So it's going to feel a little weird there. And the guns that the gunslinger is supposed to be using probably don't have the area fire and auto fire traits, right? And so you're supposed to be this gun expert, but maybe everyone else is better at using guns than you, better in that they can spray bullets absolutely everywhere. And it feels weird to be the gun expert that fires this big scary gun, but you fire once and then you have to reload while everyone is out there with their little pew 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 laser rifles that repeatedly can fire off shots. And so you can call this a flavor fail, you can call this a mechanical fail, kind of depending on where exactly you want to draw the line. But I think the gunslinger is effectively going to feel weird. And I think many Pathfinder 2E classes that want to play a ranged gameplay style that aren't the gunslinger are going to get a sort of numerical advantage by using Pathfinder 2E guns. Your generic, you don't have to reload me gun in Pathfinder 2E is an air repeater, which is a D4 weapon. Well, now you can probably get a D6 or a D8 weapon depending on what traits exactly you're looking for. And you're not going to be wasting action economy reloading. And you have the boost trait to throw on some extra damage, which ranged characters absolutely will appreciate. And beyond that, your guns are maybe usually going to be doing piercing damage in Pathfinder 2E. Well, now you have all these other crazy weapon types, and maybe you got a flamethrower, or maybe you're tossing electric bolts out of your gun. You're going to be able to have other ways to get around resistances, or an ability to choose what damage types you are actually doing. So there is going to be some real degree of mechanical difference. Maybe for the good, maybe for the bad, depending on how you're viewing it. But one thing's for sure. If you want, you can make some very, very big numbers by combining these two systems. And if you want to think about what you are capable of doing with all-in actions, the boost trait on weapons can do some really, really cool stuff. So I'm playing a campaign at level 5. Boost raw should be giving you 2 extra damage dice worth of damage right now. So on something like a Pain Glaive, I believe that is a D10 base weapon, that has boost for another d10 worth of damage, or at level 5, given the grade of weapon, you would probably have 2d10. Well, you could also get some extra damage dice on top of that with something like Vicious Swing. Or maybe you're an inventor and you are doing an unstable megaton strike with a boost weapon of some kind. Well, you could deal some absolutely silly damage numbers, especially on a critical hit. But something to keep in mind here is that you're using one action to boost, and then you are doing a 2-action activity that is one of these meta strikes. And you have 2 options for what happens on your turn. You hit or you miss. And that is 3 actions gambled on 1 die roll. And if you're using all 3 of your actions for that, then you maybe don't have room for something like a true strike in there, a sure strike in there, to go and increase the reliability of that big attack actually hitting. So I think you are capable of making some insanely high damage rolls. The I'm screenshotting this and posting it to Reddit sort of things. But will this actually be better than striking multiple times or setting up flanking or demoralizing or whatever before making your strike? That may or may not be true. But the numbers, they will go brrr. And if we start getting into some of the other nuance of the system differences, Starfinder 2E uses class DC more than Pathfinder 2E does. And so some of the generic actions, like throwing a grenade or doing an area fire, are going to use your class DC. So you may get into these really weird situations where a Pathfinder class has an aggressively scaling class DC, and so they become the best area fire users, and they become the best grenade users, even if that has nothing to do with their class fantasy at all. And this may create some very strange play patterns where you have a kineticist who is throwing grenades all of the time because they have a good class DC. Or you specifically have played the light mortar inventor using that class archetype to get the very, very aggressively scaling inventor class DC so that you can hurl grenades around. And it may feel really, really weird where the flavor of your class gets just absolutely drowned out by like the possible mechanical benefits of doing some of this mixing and matching. And I think this is something to be aware of. You can probably crunch some numbers and go, oh, hey, is this actually better than using my kinetic blast every turn? I looked, and some of the high level grenades can hit like a 20-foot radius for a single action. So, that is going to be some sort of stuff that could come up if you start mixing these two together and you start trying to drop these Pathfinder characters into the Starfinder worlds. And I do think some characters are going to be able to drop in and just be natural predators to what's going on in Starfinder 2E. So I want you to imagine that you're just on a space station, you're trying to catch some bandits or something like that. And now they're not bandits with knives, they're bandits with guns. And you just drop in your level 1 fighter who has reactive strike when someone makes a ranged attack. Yeah, you're firing your gun, that's a ranged attack. And that fighter just gets to absolutely feast and use that reaction all the time. I do think there will be situations where something simple like this happens, and a Pathfinder class is actually very, very well positioned within the Starfinder metagame. So my overall ruling here is still that this is a thumbs up, still this is going to be fine, but there might be some tension points that feel a little bit awkward. I don't think there is going to be anything here that unbalances your game in terms of the numbers. But I do think that you might find a couple of situations where you go, hey, this is a little weird. And so I would treat doing this like it has the uncommon tag. Ask the GM first. The answer would probably be yes in terms of power level. So once again, let's go the other direction now. Let's drop our Starfighter character into the Pathfinder world and see how that feels mechanically speaking. And I think the first thing that you are immediately going to run into is piloting doesn't exist, and computers don't exist. And so if your Starfinder class or heritage or whatever comes with a training in one of those, you probably just want to instantly retrain that into a different skill that does exist in Pathfinder 2E. Now, can you reflavor these? Yes, absolutely. Piloting is no longer piloting a spaceship. Piloting is driving a car, driving a chariot, a check that you do on horses. I think you can reflavor that if you want. Computers is no longer computers. Computers is now the technology of your era. Okay, guns exist in your world. Cool. Your computer's check now becomes, hey, do I know how guns are made? Do I know what is going on with this gunpowder? Do I know kind of what is going on with some other advanced thing of your era? Maybe it becomes something about architecture, for example, or science as a more general thing. You could do some reflavoring there. Although, admittedly, I think just retraining is easier because I think if you are trying to get very general with computers, you might be running into some of the things that lore skills might be doing instead. Now, a lot of the really cool Starfinder 2E weapons have the tech trait, which has the possibility of becoming glitching and not working as well. If you take tech weapons and you put them into Pathfinder 2E, where nothing is ever going to give you glitching, then your weapon never has a downside. Your two-handed maul, that always works. You always hit people with that. That's always good, unless you get into some weirdo enemy that is trying to erode your weapons or something like that, which I tend to ignore those sorts of mechanics as a GM because I don't really find they're fun. But if you take these Starfinder weapons, which as part of their innate balance have this tech trait, so they can be, depowered, they can start glitching and malfunctioning, and you just go, hey, the downside of your weapon is never going to happen, you have made those weapons mechanically stronger than they already were. Now, I want you to imagine that you are trying to play a soldier, and you want to do your area fire or auto fire nonsense along with your primary target thing, because that's what your class is supposed to do. Well, there's no guns in Pathfinder 2E that have a capacity trait that kind of works for the things like area fire and auto fire. So if you are trying to go, I want to play a soldier, but the GM says I can't have Starfinder items, I have to use Pathfinder items, the character physically doesn't work unless you're jumping through some hoops and you're playing a melee soldier so that you can use your area fire with your melee weapon. And you might run into some other things. Okay, we're only using Pathfinder 2E items. Well, what about the Solarian, who can upgrade their magical crystal attacks that I have forgotten the name of and I'm not going to look up? They're kineticist impulse blasts. Well, they're supposed to have crystals that are separate from runes or tactical gear upgrades. Grade upgrades, there we go. Well, what are we doing for them? Are we ignoring those? Are we giving Are we giving you a gate attenuator that is supposed to work the same general way? You might run into some mechanics hiccups if you are trying to limit things here. And a big one that I think is going to come up is that a ton of Starfinder 2E specific spells reference technology. And a lot of them involve computers or monitors in some way, where you need to be able to see a screen to cast this spell, or plant life erupts from some computers, or a comm unit is required for this spell, and I'm gonna play you a little bit of pep music. I'm gonna play you your theme song to power you up. And I think if you are trying to use a Starfinder 2E spell list in a Pathfinder game, there's going to be a lot of these spells that even if you took them, you physically could not cast them because you can't meet the requirements of one or more screens are in sight, one unattended computer or tech object that you can see. And there's going to be some spells that potentially make tech weapons glitch. Well, there's not going to be any tech weapons for you to use those on, right? And so some of the things might not mesh up well here. Beyond that, Starfinder does treat flight a little differently. They are a little less afraid to give out flight. The Barathu, for example, have a 20 feet fly speed from level 1. And there's some other ancestries that I think can fly in a vacuum, or fly in the whatever the fancy space void was called. And so if you are playing in a party with Pathfinder 2e characters who are expecting to get flight a little bit later on, maybe from an ancestry feat later on that scales up over time, or maybe from the fly spell off a spell list, you can outclass them in terms of your access to flight. And there are just items that give flight that are available to everyone in Starfinder 2e as well. Beyond that, I think there are some design differences between Starfinder 2e and Pathfinder 2e. For example, in reading through the ancestries, I found that fortune effects tended to be way, way more common in Starfinder 2e than Pathfinder 2e. So the average Starfinder 2e character might be able to better mitigate a singular bad roll than a Pathfinder character would be. I don't think there are major power balance discrepancies between the two systems, but there are going to be some things that one system or the other, their characters are better capable of dealing with. And in terms of those differences, I think if you are comparing an original Pathfinder 2e class, even if it's remastered, a caster class, to a Starfinder 2e caster class, the Starfinder 2e casters are going to look really good. They are 4-slot casters. They have fantastic single action activities that are repeatable, that really allow them to interact well with the 3-action economy. And I think caster design has gotten better in the last couple of years. I think the casters from the Animist on in Pathfinder 2e, so like the Animist and the Necromancer, I think those are on the same level as the Witchwarper and the Mystic are. But if you're just playing a stock wizard or sorcerer and someone else is playing a Witchwarper, there might be some jealousy there. I'm not going to lie to you. And I think the Starfinder classes, casters specifically, are going to have some better options for long range combat. Everybody has access to simple things like Reach Spell, but Reach Spell is totally outclassed by some of the things that the Witchwarper has, where they can just kind of cast things within the area of their quantum field for a single action as sort of a super reach spell that maybe is reach spell not for 30 feet, but for like 70 extra feet or something like that. And you might notice that taking some of the Starfinder 2e stuff and throwing it in a Pathfinder 2e setting gives a small advantage to the Starfinder characters. So, for example, the Witchwarper is really, really good at making difficult terrain. And you could do that with, say, the Anomalies focus spell Warp Terrain or the level 1 feat Debris Field. Well, if everyone in Pathfinder 2e is operating as pseudo-martial characters or close-range characters, and they have to move through that difficult terrain, the Witchwarper feels even better than it normally would. Whereas sometimes you throw down that difficult terrain, and the Starfinder enemy is going to be like, okay, yeah, no, I'm not getting across that. And they're going to pull out their gun, and they are going to shoot you instead. That option might not be on the table in a Pathfinder 2e game. I think overall, my verdict here is still a thumbs up despite all of this. But I'm going to say this is a thumbs up with a rare tag. Maybe even the very rare tag. And I think you have to ask your GM if you want to do something like this. I think overall, in terms of the mechanics and the numbers, everything is probably fine. But I don't know that you get to just take one tiny thing that you want from Starfinder 2e and have that work. I think you can do that with something like the casters. But I think if you are going to take one of their martial characters, then that might mean taking at least the weapons with them. And so I have liked what I have seen so far in doing this, but I do think it needs to be approached with some degree of caution, because I do think that you are going to have some of these differences and hiccups that are going to require some degree of special attention from the GM and the players. All right, as we move towards the conclusion of this video, I want to just kind of talk about a few things, starting with the fact that I think Pathfinder 2E and Starfinder 2E are actually compatible in a very, very positive way. I think you can view Starfinder as an expansion for Pathfinder, and I think you can view Pathfinder as an expansion for Starfinder. But I think that's exactly what it is. It is an expansion. It is an extra thing that you can do, and it perhaps should not be the expectation that your Starfinder stuff is allowed in your Pathfinder game, and your Pathfinder stuff should not necessarily be expected to be allowed in your Starfinder game. I think going both directions there, this is something that is optional. And I think this is going to fall into the same territory of things like Free Archetype, Ancestry Paragon, not the Mystic rules, the Mythic rules. Let's fix that. And I think incorporating Starfinder stuff into your Pathfinder game should be treated kind of the same way that these other things are. They are options that they can do. They will change the nature of your game a little bit, but they don't undo the overall balance of the game. Are free archetype characters stronger than traditional Pathfinder 2e characters? Unquestionably, that is true. Maybe you have more skill trainings, so you are better out of combat. Maybe you have something that is giving you a little extra damage, a barbarian archetype, an exemplar archetype, a rogue archetype for sneak attacker. The math is going to change a little bit. Maybe it's in combat, maybe it's out of combat, but it's not unbalancing the game. Maybe you add one extra monster here and there. Maybe you can more safely do higher difficulty combats that you might be hesitant to do without them. But free archetype doesn't break the game. Similarly, mythic rules are going to change things. Ancestry Paragon rules are going to change things. But it's still Pathfinder, right? And so I think incorporating the Starfinder stuff into your Pathfinder game is going to change things. Some classes are going to get better. There's going to be some very strong options that exist, kind of mixing and matching things from the systems. But I don't think it is going to be a bad thing. And I am very much looking forward to doing more playtesting with this system, or really, these systems. And with that, I think I'm going to call it a day. I hope this was useful to you all, and I'll be back again next Friday for some more sweet content. Alrighty, see ya!